Okay, welcome to our second episode of our feminism series. In this one, we're going to look at the structure of the creative industry from a radical feminist perspective. What is the radical feminist perspective? So there are a lot of feminist movements out there that have to do with representation and have to do with getting women into speaking roles, getting women into certain fields. But what the radical feminist does is, yes, it's important to increase representation, obviously. But if you increase representation in an industry that has a patriarchal structure, which is, by the way, every single industry, because we live in the patriarchy, it doesn't actually fix the structure. It doesn't dismantle the structure. All it does is it actually upholds the system indirectly. And I mean, one example which we heard at like an event that we were at, which I really liked, was that you can bring women into a field and you can be like, okay, all these women are now moving to this field, bring women into tech. But what happens is, this is just the reality of the world we live in, is as soon as an industry becomes female dominated, the whole value of that industry goes down, and women are not going to automatically make the same money that men make in that industry just because they are now in the same roles. They will make less. Why? Because of the structure of the whole thing, and because women are just not valued as much as men. So women are now, let's say, they're in their tech field, they're doing all this work that men used to do, but they're making less just based on the fact that they're women. And that happens because of the structure that isn't dismantled before you move women into these fields. And why am I talking about this? It's because the creative industry obviously has a patriarchal structure as well. And we talk a lot about how we are representing women as two women leading an agency, and we've talked to other women who lead agencies, and all of that is positive. But the thing is, as women in the industry, if we do the same thing that men have been doing for probably, I don't know when the first agency was created, but probably over a century ago, then all we're doing is upholding that same structure. And it's important to look at the structure, look at what it means, how it affects women, so that you can, over time, dismantle it and hopefully get to a point. I mean, that's idealistic because I don't think we ever will get there, but hopefully get to a point where we don't have to talk about this anymore, and it's not something that affects us as women in the industry.
Yeah.
So that was a big intro.
That was a big intro. I don't even know where to continue off of now. I guess
there are a lot of things we can talk about when it comes to this.
That's true. I guess I would like to thank you for the intro, by the way. It was really good. I would like to frame this episode as maybe let's start with a statement, which is that the creative industry thinks it's progressive. And I think from the outside it does look progressive because it's seen as very queer friendly, very anti-racist, very anti-sexism on the surface.
On the surface, of course.
Yeah, on the surface it seems to be a really, really progressive field. But in the background, as you already mentioned, it's basically just plagued by the old conservative structures. And they are built upon, let's look at agencies, not just from a lens of an agency owner, but also from a worker. I think that we have all been, everyone listening to this, I'm assuming has been working in agencies or has heard of someone working in agencies and about the structures there. And basically, people burn out, people work for free, people have a lot of, okay, wait a minute, let's just go back a little bit more. First of all, the entry into an agency. You start with an internship, most likely unpaid or paid very little.
But you're expected to work full time.
Exactly. Yeah. Then it's not really an internship in most cases because mostly you just do work no one wants to do. Okay, that's fine. That's what you do as an intern, I guess. However, most don't take the time to actually teach you. So I would say the value of an internship is more agency-centered than it is intern-centered. That's where it all starts. Okay, then you finally make it into a design or into an agency, and suddenly, okay, you're underpaid. That's probably how you're going to start. you're gonna have an all-in contract most likely, or you're gonna work more than 40 hours a week. I think most beginners can relate to this statement.
Yeah.
And so what I'm trying to say here is that the structure itself lives on exploitation, mostly linked to the people who execute, because the industry in itself it used to be very profitable. Right now, I would say it's not as profitable as it used to be. So how do you uphold the structures that are already in place? You have to kind of milk people even more. And we have like a lot of designers who suffer from burnout, a lot of people who quit the design industry, me included. I mean, I'm here again, but in a different context. But overall, it's the structures that are currently in place that uphold the imbalance of the creative industry.
Yeah, and to bring it back to the why this affects women, or why this matters in terms of feminism. So a lot of, maybe people are listening, maybe you're a man, and maybe you think this affects me too. Like, what has this got to do with feminism? The thing is that it disproportionately affects women, and particularly women of color, because, I mean, not to go too much into the race thing, but if you're interested in radical feminism, like, obviously women of color are the leaders of that, the whole concept, because they're affected the most by the patriarchy. But the reason why women are disproportionately affected by these types of structures is because women already have to worry about the fact that they probably will at some point be taking time off for maternity leave, which means they can't afford to work for free, not even for 6 months for an internship, because their pension is already going to be affected by time off, and they can't afford to take more time off. Let's say you already have a child. You can't work for free if you have a child. You also can't work more than 40 hours if you have a child. So it's like the whole industry is not made for women. And this is true of a lot of industries, like any 9-to-5 job, in my opinion, is not made for women. But our industry in particular, and because that's the context of this episode, basically anything that expects you to work for free is a luxury that women don't have. And it's something that was built by men for men. And that's where the whole thing about feminism comes into play, because it's important to realize that these structures are there, so we can start to think about how can we create an industry that's inclusive, that's actually inclusive, and not like you said, like it seems inclusive, but the structure isn't.
Yeah, also maybe to mention another example for free labor, it's not just internships, it's also like the pitching culture, or like the, I don't know what it's called in English. I'm not sure if it's pitch, but Ausschreibung. Oh.
Yeah, like call for
design. Okay,
yeah.
So also those are like tied to the free work that you just mentioned. It's basically, you see that a lot. It's no news to you that there are people who like write a whole ass ad being like, yeah, this is our design competition, the best sushi wins, and you get maybe like exposure or maybe like some kind of prize money. Although you like worked, I don't know how many hours on that. It's just extremely devaluing. It also favors people who can actually afford to work for free.
Working for free is a luxury, and it's a privilege, and it's something what people with privilege can do. And it's also people who have the ability to think like, okay, I mean, by ability I mean financial stability, to be like, okay, I can take this on for free because I know like this opportunity might lead to more opportunities. And the two of us were in that position, like when we started, as yes, we're women, but yes, we also have like parents that can worst case pay for us, like, and these kinds of things, like these structural things, make it possible for us to take on that work, to be like, okay, we can do this for like a little bit less. But there are people out there, and it's always disproportionately women, because women carry the major load when it comes to child care, that cannot take on that work, because we were lucky at the time, and still are lucky, I guess, we don't have children. But had we had children at the time, I'm sure we never would have done the things that we did.
No.
Like a lot of the risks we took were only possible because we had the luxury to do that.
Maybe let's also talk about risk then, because this industry rewards risk. I mean, a lot of industries do, of course, but especially this one, like starting just from the internship, it's also a risk because you don't know if it's going to lead anywhere, but you invest half a year, sometimes even a year of your time in hopes that you'll get a job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's true. Sometimes people intern for a whole year.
I did that.
Yeah.
I mean, I interned for almost a year in 2 different agencies because I like saw the big picture and because I could afford it, but not everyone can. Another thing I want to talk about in terms of structure is ownership. That is also a really important one because in the current structure of agencies, if you look at the demographics who have most of the ownership, and by ownership I mean who have an agency, who own design work, who own IPs or contracts, they are predominantly men. So this is also something within the system that's already broken and still present to this day, meaning that, of course, it all seems like progressive and fun from the outside, yet those things are still in play, which is kind of like ironic.
And that's the thing, like these feminist movements that are about representation, it only does so much because you aren't going to change the structure. It's not like all those agencies that dominate Austria, let's say, are suddenly going to be taken over by women. No, it's still men who own those agencies. It's still men in the leadership positions in those agencies. And even if you switch out those male roles for females, you still have the structure above and below that that is still in place. So you're still hiring interns for unpaid work. You're still taking part in unpaid pitches, which you can do as a luxury because you're a huge agency and you have the money and the resources. And that's the thing that doesn't change is when you just think about, okay, how can we get women into this field? Which isn't even the issue in our industry, which is so interesting. And I think that's something we should go into
Exactly.
next.
I actually read my mind about that. Let's talk about the entry. Last episode, we talked that there are like specific male-dominated jobs that have a difficult entry, like, for example, construction work, a difficult entry for women, of course. Like, for example, construction work. However, design does not have that, and yet still we are underrepresented in the field, in leadership positions, also as designers, as I would say as famous designers, as well-known
as
designers.
Experts.
Yeah, that's a good way to put it. Do you want to go ahead and read the stats?
Yeah. The thing I wanted to look at, and I mean, I guess it's kind of confirmation bias what we did, but it's also just facts. So I was just assuming this just based off of my own anecdotal evidence. Like when we were at university, we had 2 guys in our class, 2 men. Our class was, how many were we? Like 20?
A bit more even.
22, something like that. But it was predominantly women, okay? And still, like, everything I was seeing, all the agencies we talked about at university, all the designers that we learned about, it was all men. And I'm thinking, like, how is this possible that so many women graduate and then all you ever hear about are men? So we looked at the statistics, and I'm going to look at the ones for Austria, Germany, Switzerland, which has design students at 55 to 70% women, 30 to 45% men. So the early entry into design is female dominated, you could say, based off of that. Then when you look at, though, the studio ownership, which is 15 to 30% women owned, and then 70 to 85% men owned, it shows that it's almost flipped. So you have 70, if you look at the upper number, 70% of design students are women, but then 70% of studios are owned by men, even though only 30 to 45% of men are studying design. So how is it possible that we have all these women studying design, but then only 15 to 30% of them, or 50 to 30, not of them, but 50 to 30% of studios are owned by women? That doesn't make sense. Like, the numbers don't add up.
I think it gets even more interesting that that even though what you mentioned is, let's take the higher end of, no, let's take the lower end of the number, because whatever, let's say 55% are of the design students are women, 55 to 70%. It's still interesting to see that according to statistics, only 25 to 30% make up the design workforce. Like, what's happening in between? It's kind of like something like, yeah, I don't know what I'm going with this because I don't have an answer.
It shows to me that a lot of women study it, but they aren't able to then make a career out of it. Why? I mean, this could be for many reasons. This could be things like they decide to start a family and decide to do something less risky. Because I feel like the design profession is kind of risky because the entry level amount that you make is very low. So maybe they decide to just be stay-at-home mom. Like, those could be the family things. It could also be that they realize they can't get a job, which I feel like is probably also a huge issue. I mean, I don't have any statistics on this, but I'm assuming, just like any other industry, that men have it easier getting jobs.
Yeah, something I wanted to mention, because they're seen as more capable, and women often don't even not interview, but like apply to jobs where they don't really fulfill all the requirements of the job. Like, there's like a lot of things that has to do with the current state of society that could have happened in between. It's definitely something to research, but I'm still pretty shocked by the numbers. I already knew also from anecdotal evidence that this is like somewhat true, but seeing the numbers black and white, and of course I know that these numbers are like don't take them with a grain of salt, because there's like not any real registry or real statistics on, like a real registry on how many women are designers and things like that. So it's more like it's based on like different studies and kind of then just like put together. So again, take it with a grain of salt. However, I think it's still pretty telling.
Yeah. And I think that to tie it back into our last episode, which had to do with the history, yes, we aren't represented in history, and we aren't represented now in leadership roles. So a lot of people may say, okay, so one reason why women are not in leadership roles is because they don't see that as their role. And yes, that certainly plays a part. But the second bigger issue that comes up, and that's what this episode is about, is the patriarchal structure that we live in that doesn't allow us to reach that level of success in any industry, probably, but in our industry, especially according to these numbers and also according to our experience. So how can we change that? I think that, yes, representation is important. I think that it needs to become more accessible and possible for women to make money in our industry, to be able to reach that level of success where you're actually leading an agency or a creative team. And the only way that that will ever be possible is if we stop with things like pitches, unpaid pitches, stop with things like unpaid internship. Anything that has to do with free work needs to immediately stop for that to change. The 9-to-5 work week has to change. That's also inaccessible for women.
Also not realistic for our field.
Yeah.
Once again, this field, like as a creative, most of you can relate to not being really productive exactly 9 to 5. I mean, most people aren't really productive 9 to 5, but especially creative people. Sometimes creativity it usually comes in waves. Sometimes you design something extremely quick because inspiration struck you, and sometimes it takes you days to design something super easy. It's not linear. And I think that that's also a reason why I forgot where I was going with this.
Why the 9 to 5 doesn't work?
Thank you. There's also a reason why the 9 to 5 doesn't work.
Yeah, and it doesn't work for women with children because sometimes, I mean, the amazing thing about being self-employed is that it actually is a super amazing opportunity for women who have children because you can choose when you work. So you can be like, okay, I'll work in the evenings because that's when my child is sleeping, like if you still have the energy or whatever. Or you do your work on days where you're able to do your work, and then the other days you're not doing anything, and you can plan your time. But the problem is that then you have countries like Austria, which are, if you're self-employed, it's catastrophic if you have a child financially, because as a single business owner, you would have to get money from the government, which you pay into, by the way, all the time. To get that money out, you have to then say, okay, I'm not working anymore. And then you start getting like, I don't know, what is it? Like, what did we looked it up? Like 1,400.
Yeah, not much.
Not enough to live, and not enough to pay for a child.
Especially if you think about, sorry to interrupt you, especially if you think about the money you would get when you're self-employed versus that money, like your lifestyle would significantly take a hit.
I mean, you can't even afford an apartment these days with 1,400 euros.
Nope.
Let alone raising a child. So you either do that, or you hire somebody for the time that you're on maternity leave, which hiring in Austria is extremely expensive. And you don't get, you get that 1,400. These are the only ways you would get that money. So to get any money from the government, from the taxes that you pay as a self-employed person,
which is a lot, by the way,
is either to be like, I'm not working anymore, and then you just live off of this 1,400. Tell all your clients, hey, sorry, I'm not working anymore. Or you hire somebody, which is not feasible for a single person business, usually. And then you would get your 1,400, which you would probably end up spending on the person that you hired, but whatever. So in both, and then you also aren't allowed to pay yourself a salary, by the way, if you do that. So what option is left? You just keep working while you have your child. And yes, that is potentially a good business model for you because you can choose when to work, whatever, but it's not sustainable. So the systems we have in place, not only in our industry, but also in our government and the country that we live in, and I'm sure this is true for most countries, they don't allow women to excel in these positions because you are automatically at a disadvantage as soon as you decide you want children. And that's something men never have to deal with. That and the pension thing, which is like another thing. If women want to be in leadership positions, even to go back to having children, if they wanted to be in a leadership position, they probably wouldn't be able to have children at the same time. Because what agency is going to promote you if you're gone for like a year? It's unlikely.
I mean, on top of that, most women return on a part-time basis. So, a part-time leader is also kind of like not really efficient, I would say.
And then to come to the pension thing, so then you've missed a year of work, that affected your pension. Then you come back to your part-time job, it's affecting your pension. And then you end up with less wealth that you've accumulated over the years, and then because you're working part-time, and then you end up also with like a very small pension. So you're basically fucked as a woman in any field probably, but it's particularly for me just because it affects me the most because I'm in this industry. I think it's a missed opportunity that we don't make self-employment more easier, more accessible, and more profitable for women, because it's actually could be a better alternative to the 9-to-5. Because I don't see that changing in our industry, the agency life.
No, because as long as it's predominantly male oriented, why should it change? Unless, I mean, there are of course some men who are really trying to fight for change. But I think that most people, since they're profiting from the system, they're unwilling to actually dismantle the system.
Yeah, 100%. And also to go back to who's represented in our industry, who wins awards, who creates awards, who decides on all those things, who created the structure in the first place, it's men. And we recently saw something crazy on LinkedIn, which I think is kind of has to do with this episode. this guy posted a LinkedIn post about how he took part in an award and he actually won. And then he was expected, like the service fee, because he won the award, was $2,900 or euros.
I don't know. I mean, it's still a lot for someone who's a freelancer.
And he was like, what the, like, okay, it was his fault because he didn't read the fine print, whatever. But he was just shocked at the amount. And he said it's not accessible for like one person businesses. And they still expected him to pay. They're like, yeah, you can pay in installments, whatever. He ended up paying it and he didn't want the award anymore because he was like upset about the whole thing. That as well, like, is so man-coded, that whole thing. Like, to create a whole award system where you then award how many people, 33% of people who applied for the award got the award, which is a crazy win rate. And it was this whole like for-profit concept. And then it's disguised as like this prestige, but then it's also inaccessible to anybody who's like obviously disproportionately going to affect women and also other marginalized communities.
I mean, I don't want to name any names, so I'm not gonna. But we were once part of a jury, and I remember that a lot of people were like in that award, you basically have the awards, but the people who don't reach the state of getting like an award, they are like mentioned in the book. It's like kind of like, let's call it a pre-award. I don't know what it's actually called, like a mention. And that already costs money. So people who don't get awards and would just get a mention, they're like pretty fucked because they also have to pay for that mention, but they didn't even get an award. And yeah, I just found just a little story on the side because I found it also so ridiculous.
And I get that it's like a marketing expense, and for a big agency, it's an expense. But for anybody else, it's a huge burden. And then you're not able to, that's the thing, is that then these people, particularly women and marginalized communities, are not able to take part in the industry the way that other people are able to take part in. And who are those other people? It's mostly big agencies run by men. So then you have this whole system that is upheld by what men created, which is men are giving other men awards. They're paying for that award, and then they have this prestige and they're named in this award like they did something and achieved something, but really all they did was they submitted their work. They were chosen among 33% of winners, and then they were able to pay the fee. So it's like it's a really privileged position to be in, and it doesn't actually represent anything real in terms of merit or how good somebody is. And that just leads to these communities and women not being able to participate in the industry the same way that people of privilege can. And yeah, that's a sad way to end this episode. So.
No, let's not end it on the sad note here. I mean, there's actually
another thing that because we're talking about like what could change in our industry.
Exactly.
So another thing that we could change in our industry is to stop that culture. I'm all for awards, and like having to pay for the submission is fine. They need to make money. Like there are people behind that. I'm the last person to be like, it should be free. However, it shouldn't be something that is like for profit, and like how can we generate as much profit as possible, and how can we make this thing so inaccessible that only people of privilege can partake in it?
Yeah, I mean, okay, I know that it's like we're kind of like sidetracking here, but also you pay you pay an admission fee, like an upload fee. So meaning for every submission that you do, you pay a fee. I mean, where does that? Enough. Yeah, in my opinion, yes. I don't know how much these things cost, of course, because I know that there's like a ceremony, like there's way more that goes into that. I understand that, and we don't see like the full picture as an outsider. I just still think it's excessive to pay such a huge amount when you win, because what if you cannot pay it, as you mentioned, and then you end up without an award?
Yeah.
Or like financially, I don't know. Financially, I don't know, not impaired, but financially.
Like an existential crisis.
Exactly, because for some people, that really means that.
2,900 euros is a lot.
Yeah.
for a lot of people, and that's an insane amount to expect from an award. And I just think that, to go back to how you started this episode, which was about how our industry acts like it's inclusive, acts like it's progressive, it isn't. And there's so many things that they're really like deep in our industry. The awards thing is one of them, like awards and prestige. Pitch culture. These are huge topics in our industry that are really normalized, encouraged even.
Internship culture.
Also encouraged.
Wait, just getting my notes because I took some more. The pricing models are also...
Yeah, okay, let's talk about the pricing models because that's going to be the next episode.
Well, yeah, that's a good one.
So it's a good place to end the episode. Yeah. Okay, one thing we didn't touch upon in this episode is because we want to do a whole episode on about it is the pricing of creative work. And we talked a lot about how a lot of creative work is just expected and free, historically, but also today when we talk about internships, and how execution work in particular is not compensated as much as strategic work or design thinking. And surprise, surprise, a lot of that has to do with what we value and what we don't value. And who decides that? Spoiler alert. It's the people in the positions of power. So like, obviously, when we talk about awards, who's deciding who's on the panel and who is deciding what's valuable enough to receive an award? Or in hiring processes, who's deciding which person should be promoted, which person should be hired? And historically and also canonically, that's been men and is men. So in the next episode, we're going to talk about value and how that goes into pricing, creative work, and how that also affects men in our industry, not just women. Thank you for listening to this episode of Never Went to Business School. Don't forget to follow us here on Spotify. And if you enjoy our content, check out our YouTube channel for more educational videos and subscribe to our newsletter on Substack.